Good evening and welcome. My name is Jackie Vossler, and I'm the president of the Caxton Club. Tonight's meeting represents a conclusion of our 125th anniversary celebration year. It has been not the year we envisioned, but nevertheless, it has been a year that has exceeded our visions in many ways. I want to thank all of you for having joined us for so many meetings and programs in the daytime and through the night this year. Tonight's program was conceived several years ago. It was conceived when we first printed Chicago by the Book, 101 publications that shaped the city and its image. At that time, we saved aside some unbound pages with the idea that as part of our 125th celebration, we would bind some additional copies of our book. Far off plans sometimes require some modification. And we decided that it was not fair to allow only the binders to reimagine our Chicago by the Book. But we also wanted to include the book artists as well. Tonight's presentation features 3 binders, Lisa Dowd, Sam Ellenport, and Marty Sears, and 3 book artists, Ben Blount, Hannah Batzel, and Jen Farrell. Bios of each of these artists and binders follow on the succeeding pages. Last spring, when we commissioned these artists and binders to do this project, it was always our intention that tonight would be the unveiling. And we were quite surprised at the beautiful work they rendered. All the bindings and artist books will be available for auction on August 28th. And this entire project was done to benefit these artists and binders and to highlight those contingencies within our club. The program features 2 parts. The first are contributors, each talking about their project, followed by a panel discussion led by Martha Chipless. Please enjoy. I hope you are as surprised as we were.
Hi, I'm Hannah Batzel, and I'm a book artist. I did my project based on Weird Tales magazine. So Weird Tales magazine was a 1920s sci-fi and fantasy publication where a lot of really famous sci-fi and fantasy writers first got their start. So I wanted to do a book about the devotees, I guess, of that magazine. So my book is called Weirder Than Fiction. This is the front cover, and this is what it looks like when it is closed. But when it opens up, you can see, this is a top-down view. It opens up into these 3 little pop-up compartments. On one end, we have this one, a guy in his apartment, and then there's a woman in her apartment on the other end. And in between them, we have kind of a street view with windows that can see into each other's apartments. There's a text on both sides, and it's not super long, so I'll read it for you really quick. Over on the guy's side, he writes, "Let me commit my darkest suspicions to paper, that some of my dread may be alleviated. I'm surer now than ever that my neighbor, gaunt but radiantly lovely, must be a member of the vampiric Vernet family of France. Descendants of that most accursed bloodline, doomed to be visited on the midnight of their 28th year by a great bat-like creature and become blood drinkers themselves, have somehow infested my humble Chicago borough. She abhors the sunlight, operating only at night and waiting, stalking by her window for the demon's arrival. I know not when her 28th birthday will arrive, But already I see such nightmarish shapes through that crimson glass. Already I hear such otherworldly yowls. Though I have begun to feverishly collect religious relics and nightly recite the Lord's Prayer to repel the beast, its time must be drawing near, and no mortal man can stop it. So he's been reading The Brotherhood of Blood by Hugh Cave, which was first published in Weird Tales magazine. And his poor neighbor, upon whom all of his suspicions are cast, has been reading H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu. She writes, I fear that by recording these thoughts, I sign my own death warrant, for no one lives long who brings to light the horrible practices of the cult of Cthulhu. Already I scarcely leave by the light of day, lest I be followed and fall victim to some accident at the hands of its loathsome agents. But my kitten cries piteously for food, and I myself can feel the gnaw of hunger driving me out. There lives a man across the way, haunted but handsome, and of that sensitive nature so susceptible to the nightmare thought transmissions of the great old ones. His sleep is fitful, and I often see him pacing by the window, twining through cephalopodic tendrils distorted in the glass, and chanting some muffled incantation. When he does slumber, does he dream of freeing the fearsome priest Cthulhu from his ocean tomb? I can see his tentacled idol on the windowsill. How many nights, I wonder, can he supplicate to it before madness overtakes him completely? So they both have a very vivid imagination, of course, but if you look into his room from her window, you can see that the creepy tentacled idol that she's seeing is really just his little statuette of the Virgin Mary and his snake plant on the table. And the kind of creepy bat and cat and coffin silhouettes that he's seeing through her window are just a wardrobe and a pile of umbrellas and her poor hungry cat. So these two could potentially be friends, but they're I guess both drawn apart and together by their love of Weird Tales magazine. That is to say, they could be overthinking things. She does have a lot of drawings of French Gothic cathedrals, and she has a creepy kind of cameo portrait of a relative with a V underneath. So she could be part of that family. And he does have an octopus statuette and a kind of physics-defying cube that could maybe signify that he's a little more than meets the eye, but probably they're both just regular people. The glass windows in the book are real stained glass that is embedded in the pages of the book. This is what it looked like before all the paper detail was added. You can see that on the left, I've designed kind of a Cthulhu-esque window with green tentacles above aligned stars over a tumultuous sea. And on the right, we have a kind of vampire mouth, a fanged mouth closing over droplets of blood. So these are real stained glass, but everything else in the book is hand painted, including the title, which I type nerds, please forgive me for whatever kerning crimes I've committed here, but I'm taking from the Weird Tales typeface. This is what the pieces looked like. So I drew and painted them and then brought them over one by one, adding them into the room. Texture was really important to me when I was making this project. So all of the crumpled papers on the floor and in the room are real kind of crumpled papers. On the right here is the carpet in the woman's room, which is all done with stippling kind of pointillism effect so that it really feels like a textured carpet when you touch it. Similarly, the bricks on their buildings are all in 3D, and all of the paintings and other details in the room, of course, I had to actually paint in that tiny scale. So here's what one of them looked like before its frame was finished. All of the copies of Weird Tales that they have in their houses are real copies. Here is the one in which the Brotherhood of Blood appears. And here is the tiny painted version that I did. And in the woman's apartment, here is the magazine in which The Call of Cthulhu first appeared. The ghost table, I don't think really had as much cultural impact. I really wanted these spaces to feel like fully fleshed out rooms with real lighting, real people, and real little props. So in different lighting, the rooms do look like different things. Here is one where light is coming through the window, and you can kind of see the silhouettes and how the characters might be confused by them. Similarly, here's a different lighting view of the man's room. So this project was a lot of fun to work on, something I'm not super used to doing, trying out some stained glass work with books. I want to thank the Caxton Club for putting together such an interesting project. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to look at mine. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
My name is Ben Blunt, and I'll be talking about my artist book called Wish Book. So Wish Book is inspired by the Montgomery Ward and Sears catalog entry in the Chicago by the Book publication from Caxton. Specifically the Christmas catalog, which was called the Wish Book. This 500 or 600 page catalog would arrive at people's homes, and kids would immediately grab it and start circling and underlining things and folding pages to figure out what they want for Christmas. But it wasn't just for kids. It also connected rural families to all the options and styles that people in the city have. So it really had the hopes of dreams of tons of people. You can get everything in this catalog. In the essay, Russell Lewis says, they covered all the necessities of life from cradle to grave, but the catalogs played an even larger role in shaping the way people thought about themselves and their world. So I started thinking about what people wish for, and do people wish for different things? And thinking specifically about the inequalities because of race in this country, and what Black people wish for, and what white people wish for, and the American dream, and how it's not necessarily accessible to everyone. So the book talks about inequalities, American inequalities in wealth, in home ownership, and education. So as you saw, the cover is beautifully illustrated. The cover was letterpress printed by Laura Baisden of Camp Never Nice. So it's a 3-color letterpress print cut from linoleum. And the inside is more kind of stark, showing the data, referencing these inequalities, but it's still this red and green Christmas colors. These were letterpress printed as well, and it's a mix of techniques. The smaller black type and some of the larger black type, like on this page, are printed from polymer plates. The green and red bars for the charts are made from vinyl plates. So I'm cutting sandblast vinyl with an X-Acto knife, mounting it on a base to make it type high, and then printing those. So it's a 3-color print, interior and exterior. For the copy, some of the copy is pulled directly from old historical Sears catalogs, like Your Money Back, If You're Not Satisfied, and the other text is text I wrote that is referencing the data inside. So here's a chart showing the differences, inequalities in home ownership between Black and white people. So these keys were cut from vinyl. The text is polymer plates. Again, the red circles from vinyl, the text from polymer plates. And you can see, like, you start with this kind of happy, optimistic scene of a Christmas morning, and you can see that the American dream is kind of turned upside down. So on this page, the headers, I wish and I dream, that's handset wood type. The other text is from polymer. The text on the left page is pulled from an old catalog, while the quote on the right is from Senator Tammy Duckworth, talking about the American dream. So this whole section is taken from a Sears catalog where there was places to write down your list of all the things that you wanted. So there's 5 copies of this book in this edition. And one nice thing about Laura's illustration, so under the Christmas tree, there are elements that reference the content in the book. So there's a piggy bank to reference the inequality in wealth. There's a dollhouse to reference the inequality in home ownership. And then there's a stack of books to reference the inequality in education. It's like three major components of the American dream: having a ton of money, owning your own home, and giving your kids a great education.
I am Jen Farrell. I run Star Shaped Press in Chicago's Ravenswood neighborhood, and I will be talking about my book, Decent Homes, which is a response to Edith Abbott's The Tenements of Chicago. I chose to focus my book on Edith Abbott's The Tenements of Chicago, 1908 to 1935. Edith and her sister Grace were social reformers originally from a Quaker family in Nebraska. They did much of their work from Hull House here in Chicago, and were also responsible for much of the work going into the creation of the social work program at the University of Chicago. I love this book for its cold, hard data. They and their team of women canvassed a number of working class neighborhoods in Chicago, collecting their own census data and recording the living conditions and racial and ethnic makeup of each neighborhood. They then used this information to lobby on behalf of the residents for better conditions. Based on their findings, Abbott laid out what she classified as poor housing, including gloomy, windowless rooms, wretched overcrowding, poor ventilation, accumulation of garbage, unpaved streets, lack of green space, and proper sanitation. I created a pictorial landscape of her ideal housing conditions, including working plumbing and sewers, windows in all rooms, safe heating and fire escapes, garbage collection, paved streets and alleys, gardens and green spaces, play spaces for children, and community centers. Each page, whether flipped through individually or spread out, has hints of these elements that make a neighborhood thrive. But tucked inside, flaps on each page, is a hint of the housing that Abbott fought against, the dark, dingy tenements that lack the amenities of an ideal neighborhood. I wanted these to be represented because poor housing conditions are still in our midst and not just in cities. Abbott's thoughts on housing, as well as a 4-point approach to improve conditions, is printed on the reverse side of the book's pages. She felt strongly that the overall improvement of conditions was in the interest of the general public, not just for the safety, but for the decency, humanity, and respect. And this opinion included all ethnic groups and Black Americans. Because Abbott's book was written in Chicago, specifically addressing Chicago's immigrant and migrant populations and the physical makeup of our tenement housing, which differs from other cities, the book stands to form a 6-pointed Chicago star and is printed in an edition of 6, with one deluxe edition offered through the Caxton auction and the remaining available direct from me following the auction. And the entire book is printed letterpress with metal type and ornament. The title comes from 2 quotes referenced in Abbott's book, one from Dickens on decent housing and another from Roosevelt, which makes it into the book. Quote, President Roosevelt, in his Social Security message to Congress in January 1935, said that security for the individual involved 3 factors, and the first of these was decent homes to live in. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lisa Dowd, and I'm going to talk to you about the binding I did for the Caxton publication, Chicago by the Book. So you can see the image is of my book open, fully to show the front and back covers. It is a full leather binding in black goat skin. It was sewn on cords that are laced into the boards. It has red leather end bands. You'll see red, gold, and blue goat skin, as well as black suede inlays. It has been tooled in gold and also in blind. The actual sky that you see, the light blue color, is inkjet printed and hand woven Japanese Mingei paper. And it features all of the titles and authors for the 101 books that are represented in the volume. The end sheets, which you do not see, are Payamberry marbled paper, and the top edge is dyed in black. So I thought that it would be interesting for you to see the process. I took some slides during the course of my work, and I'll share how the book was actually created. So you'll see here that the book was sewn on 5 cords. This is just after it was cut off of the sewing frame. And this is ready now to be laced into the boards. The cords are actually laced into the boards, and that provides the text block attachment from the covers to the boards. And since it's sewn on 5, and that means on the front and the back, you're going to have 5 attachments to each cover. So after the attachment is completed, then you do the edge coloring, which here is in black, and then you do the lining of the spine and put the red leather end bands on. So this is in preparation for covering in leather. The skyline that you saw in the first image is actually raised off the surface. In order for me to do that, I took a template that I drew and cut it out of cardstock, and I applied to the front and back covers this cardstock, which is glued on and then pressed between foam at a very high pressure, at which you can see the impression that's left in the upper right-hand corner. And in the lower right-hand corner, this is just before I'm ready to cover with leather. So you can see the skyline image raised off the surface. So the covering in leather is done. And after it is completed, then I use those same templates that I started with, and I use them as templates for now what I'm going to do for the design on the cover. So I'm going to cut holes where I'm going to put windows in some of the buildings. I'm going to cut the lines for the support beams that are on the Hancock building. And so this is what you see in the picture on the right-hand side. You can see also at this point that I have inlaid the red and blue leather lines. So the last inlay to be done is for the title. So I'm toward the end of the book here, and then I take and cut a hole into my whole design. I cut the star out using a plastic template that's adhered to the leather. And this is so I can get a very precise cut. I remove that black leather because it's going to be replaced with a red leather that has been stamped with the title. In the upper right hand, or in the sky itself, in the right hand image, you're going to see a lot of roughed up leather. I actually had to go through and rough up the leather in the entire sky, and that had to be done kind of destroying the texture of the leather so that it created a surface that the paper would adhere to. So this is the sky. So the process of making the sky was to take 4 sheets of the blue Mingei paper and have them printed with the titles and authors, as I mentioned previously, and I cut them into 1/4-inch strips. And so each of these sheets actually represents an entire day's work of weaving the paper, just the same way you would weave a textile or weave a rug. And this is then my source material for what I'm going to use to create the sky. So because the sky is the negative image, I have to actually create or cut out using the negative template to create the sky. After that is cut, it is applied to the covers, and anywhere that the light blue is, I had to rough up the leather underneath. So that this is the result on the front and back cover after that process is completed. So the book is essentially complete for me at this point. So the last thing I do is to create a box. So this is a simple drop spine box that has marbled paper for the doublures, and it's actually the same marbled paper that I used for the doublures inside the book and the flyleaves inside the book. And then that's the process for how I created my binding.
My name is Sam Ellenport, and I am a member of the Caxton Club. I've been a bookbinder for over 50 years. I consider myself a traditional binder, having learned my craft on the bench in a shop that produced high-quality leather bindings decorated in traditional styles. It was a delight for me to work on this project, as I do such commission work infrequently. When I get such requests, I generally try to work within historic traditions, sometimes pushing against established principles of design to make the decoration meaningful in some way, as well as eye-appealing. I lean towards using only a few design elements, mostly in gold. The book which Jackie sent me is impressive, and it taught me much about publishing in Chicago. My first thoughts about design were that the book came from the Caxton Club, and it was about Chicago. And the message was that Chicago was a major hub of publishing, not only important authors, but also using new printing techniques and ideas in book production. The book's shape is not a golden rectangle, and I wanted somehow to balance a design with its traditional, somewhat squarish shape, making the cover appear closer to the traditional rectangular shape. My solution was an age-old one in bookbinding, using a central lozenge. For umpteen centuries, books often had a central stamp on the front cover. These were usually for identification, such as a coat of arms. In fact, the original stamping press were called arming presses, just for that reason. Printers by the Renaissance picked up on this idea and usually had their own identification symbol that they put in the book. The familiar one is from the Aldine Press, the dolphins surrounding an anchor. Here, several centuries later, is a book by Paul Bonnet, a 20th century French bookbinder and designer, who simply carried this idea of a central lozenge to its final degree. He uses the same tool in a couple of different sizes over and over to create an explosive circular array of exuberance in gold. In a more simplified manner, here is an earlier book that I created, To Kill a Mockingbird. It uses a single line palette to create rondelles, which are scattered slightly unevenly on the cover. It's a small confusion for the eye, and therefore it becomes an arresting design. So I started with that idea of using some kind of central lozenge, but it would not be enough simply to use the Caxton seal because the book represented so much more. After noodling around, I decided I liked the use of the letter C for both Chicago and Caxton, and I thought it would be a good symbol, though again by itself it looked too naked to make much of a statement or be of any subtle interest. After some experimentation, I hit on the idea of taking a typeface used in the late 19th century and rotating it. I made the C in an upright position, a 12 o'clock position, just a little bolder, and rotated it through 360 degrees. To my surprise, with enough rotations, the circle of C's produced an intricate design which captured the idea of a hub, the hub of a wheel. And I like that idea. It's the busyness of the rotation is what makes the eye confused, just enough to look at something a second time. And that's what all this is, a circle of C's. So after some more fiddling with the number of C's, the size of the lozenge, the number of rotations, I finally came upon something that I liked and I hope you do too. The book itself is bound in imported Morocco, which historically was used for the last 4 centuries, at least. The gilding on the edge of the pages is in gold, and I used moire for the end leaves. To keep with the theme of publishing Chicago and Caxton, I lined the protective box with plat plans of downtown Chicago, of that area where many decisions were made in the publishing world. All in all, I'm pleased with the concept and the design, and I hope you find it intriguing too. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marty Sears, and I'm going to be presenting 101 Pandemic Portraits, which is an artist book made from an altered book, Chicago by the Book, 101 Publications That Shaped the City and Its Image, which was published by the Caxton Club. When I was in grad school many years ago, the director of interdisciplinary arts at Columbia College gave me some advice. She said, when someone asks you to do something or gives you an opportunity, you should always say yes. And it's something I have thought about and kept with me for many, many years. And so when the Caxton Club asked me if I wanted to bind the book, Chicago by the Book, 101 Publications That Shaped the City and Its Image, I immediately said yes. And then after a very short panicked email to Eileen Madden, wondering if I would be able to make a project that the Caxton Club would be happy with, I proceeded, and I felt pretty comfortable doing what it is that I do, and that is making artist books. So I decided to make an altered book from the publication, and I ran with it because I'm not a bookbinder who makes fine bindings with inlaid leather and gold tooling. So I just did what came naturally to me. So the first question I asked myself is, what do I feel shapes Chicago more than anything else? And to me, it's the people. And it wasn't, that answer came to me before I even looked through Chicago by the Book very much. I had just given it a really quick scan. And when I did look through, this book really resonated with me. And it's entry number 84, Division Street, America by Studs Terkel. And in 65, Studs Terkel spent a year talking to people, Chicagoans. He didn't really have an agenda, and he talked to the common person. He felt like he made a deliberate omission, notably clergymen, college professors, journalists, and writers of any kind, because he felt that their articulateness and literacy offered them other forums. And that really felt like that felt like something I could connect with. So I decided I was going to take 101 portraits of Chicagoans, and I would link the portraits, 101 portraits, to the 101 books in Chicago by the Book. So I started out taking photos in downtown Chicago. I work at the Art Institute of Chicago. And unfortunately, by the time I was ready to take photos, the city was pretty much shut down. The Art Institute was closed, although I was still allowed to work. go to work. And a lot of things downtown were closed. A lot of shops had closed up for good. Some of them were still open, but not many. And then it became very, very cold in the winter and no one was out on the streets. So what I started doing was going through the museum and looking for people who were still in the museum. And I took pictures of my coworkers. They're probably about half of the portraits in my artist book are of my Art Institute coworkers. And I would go out into the galleries during the day looking for people, usually during lunch. One day I walked all the way across the museum and back and never came across a single person. And then I started venturing out onto the streets more, and I'd go in and out of shops. And I was usually the only person in the shop, and I'd have to ask people to remove their mask. And they were usually very happy to do it. I only had a couple of people who said no, that they were not willing to remove their mask. But everyone was really happy to talk to me and to have their portrait taken. Many of them didn't even ask what it was for or what I was going to be doing with it. It was something that really scared me to go out and approach strangers and take their photos, but it ended up giving me a lot of joy. And when I went back to work afterwards, I would usually feel really, really happy. And I really felt like I had accomplished something. So I took all of the portraits and I edited them so that they would be high contrast, black and white. And then I made them into a grid on a sheet, not unlike the cover of the Studs Terkel book. And I sent it off to Boxcar Press, and they made some high quality negatives for me. I had decided to make cyanotypes. And so I bought a UV light and I made a setup for myself, and I would lay the negatives on top of the cyanotype paper. This shows the setup in the middle, and the one on the right is just a test print to find out how many minutes it would take to get the type of blue and definition that I wanted for the portraits. And once I had all of the portraits, I started making the book. And I cut out every single portrait. I made 2 books, so there were 202 portraits to cut out. Tried to space it out a little bit so I didn't get carpal tunnel. But so I cut out all the portraits, and I made the Chicago Star for the cover. And I had decided to make an Ethiopian binding using walnut. And I cut the star in half so that half would be on the front, half would be on the back. And I glued all of the cyanotypes onto the pages of the book. This is the Ethiopian binding in progress, and this is the finished book in a drop spine box. And then I had to match up all the portraits to the pages, which I think ended up being the most difficult part. Now, this one was an easy one. Jordan Carter, he is a curator in the Department of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Art Institute. And so, of course, I put him on the Art Institute page. Some were a lot more difficult. Who do you put on the Playboy page? It didn't feel right to put a woman on there. If it's a beautiful woman, am I equating her with the Playboy bunny? If it's an older woman, does it feel like I'm making fun of her? So I found that since I didn't know a lot about the people that I took pictures of, it came down to the expression. And I felt like this man, who is actually the man who fixes my car, he's a mechanic, he had the right expression. And a lot of these came down to the expression in the eyes, whether or not they were smiling. If it was a serious subject, I couldn't put someone with a beaming smile on it. This was a really difficult one. And this is another woman I work with. Her name is Jan. I felt like she had this depth to her eyes that was just enough seriousness for a book about gangs of Chicago. And then my name is Marty Sears, and I thought, well, perfect. I'll put my portrait on the Sears Roebuck catalog. But then I found out that Ben Blunt was using the Wish book, the Sears Wish book, as a jumping off point for his artist book. So I ended up having to put Ben on the Sears catalog page. And then, of course, I thought about putting my portrait on the Division Street America page. But I ended up having a difficult subject at the very end of the book that just didn't seem right for anyone. So I wound up putting my own photo, my own portrait on the Devil in the White City page, just because I somehow, a novel about a serial killer, I didn't want to put anyone else on that page. So I put myself on that page. Many people ask me when they see the book why I did the stitching around some people and not others, or why I pierced holes. And it was about making connections from page to page. I liked that you saw the shadow of the previous person on the page. So if the stitching didn't end up going through the face on the next page, I usually put stitching or punched holes. This project pushed me to work outside of my boundaries. The work became more about the act than the end product. Working in portraits brings me back to the project I made in 2005 with a grant from the Caxton Club. And I feel like it has brought me full circle. Thank you.
Before you begin, can I say something?
Yeah.
I want to say that I wrote to each of our artisans as I allowed myself to open one package a day, because I felt that you could only have so much joy in any one day, and I didn't want to become overwhelmed. These projects were my own pandemic relief. And I want to thank each and every one of you, because it brought me a lot of joy to open them up. And I would like to tell the rest of the Caxton Club, you're very lucky that the president just didn't abscond with all of them. They're absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much, all of you. And now Martha for your panel.
So I just want to thank you all for sharing your work with us and talking about your processes and your insights about the piece that you made. And I also agree with Jackie. I got to go to the auction house and see the books in person, and I was just amazed by how fantastic they all are. So thank you very much. So I have 5 questions, and the first question is for Hannah, Ben, and Jen, and then Marty, if you want to answer this one too, you can. So the question is, how did you choose which 101 entry to respond to? And was there another entry or more than one that you seriously considered?
I'll go ahead if no one wants to go first. Yeah, there are a lot of entries, of course, about the Chicago fire, which is not surprising considering how impactful it was. And I almost made a book about the Great Chicago Fire. I think I am really drawn to very strong narrative tropes, and there's not many things that are more symbolically laden than a huge fire. And that's actually where the stained glass thing came from. I was originally going to make a multi-paneled, kind of flickering, warm tone stained glass fire book. I think really what turned that corner and made me go with Weird Tales instead is because of the research element where at the time, maybe it was pandemic related, I felt a little bit more like reading vampire and squid stories than reading about people dying in a fire. So that's really what it came down to, but I did almost go a different way.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. Someone else want to answer that one?
Want me to go, Ben?
Sure.
Yeah, I did a lot of reading last year about Nelson Algren, so I almost went in that direction because he was so good to Chicago and Chicago was so bad to him, and I thought it would be a chance to redeem some of that and create something that also celebrated his love of hanging out in the alleys, because I spend a lot of time in the alleys. But then when I saw this book about that the Abbotts had done and really dug into that and just how data driven they were and doing their own research that they used to go up against our own government to get funding where the funding needed to be. It was really inspirational. And I did the book in March, and it was Women's History Month. And it just felt like something needed to represent women that were in the book as well. And it played in really well with the styles that I like to work in. So that's why I ended up choosing that.
I just started flipping through the book. I was going to go page by page, but I thought if I just flipped through randomly, I'd let something catch my eye and kind of let Kismet let me decide. So I saw the Sears catalog and had that idea immediately, and that was on my list. I thought about the weird tales. I wasn't sure what I would do with it, but I thought that's not what I normally do. So I was going to try to challenge myself and to come up with something like Afro-futuristic or something with weird tales. I thought about Esquire magazine for a little while, but I kept going back to the witch book, and yeah, that was one of the early ones that I saw, and just stuck with it.
And I asked myself the question first, and then I looked through the book, and when I came across Division Street, it just completely resonated with me, and the portrait struck me, and from then on, even though I hit a couple of roadblocks, I knew that that's the direction I had to go in.
Okay, great, thank you. So the next question is for Lisa, Sam, and then Marty, if you want to answer. So did you find inspiration in the Lakeside Press publications? And were there other bindings that inspired you in particular?
I can start, I guess. Not specifically. I think that the rich and diverse book history of the city inspired me. The fact that many men and women throughout Chicago's history have written and printed and bound books here. A lot of these publications have actually crossed my workbench as a conservator over the past 20 plus years. So I'm familiar with many of them. I wanted, for my inspiration and what I wanted someone to feel when they saw the book, I wanted it to evoke Chicago. So it was in the materials and the cityscape that is on the cover. So I guess that's where my inspiration came from.
Okay, thank you. Sam, do you?
Yeah, I can second that, but I think when I started reading the book and going through the book, what struck me was, I don't live in Chicago, I visited Chicago in the past, but what struck me was how varied and impressive the publishing world was in Chicago. When you're on the East Coast, as I am, you think of New York and Boston, and you forget about everything in the middle of the country and on the Western coast, or very often you do. And I tried to imagine Chicago in a much larger context, because the impact of these books were not necessarily relegated to the Midwest or Chicago. They were national and international. And there's samples and impacts that were made throughout a much greater area in a much greater time frame. So I tended to take a much larger view. The Lakeside Press, interestingly enough, had a fine binding division. And there are a number of book dealers I know in Chicago who handle this kind of material. And I just tried to fit within the tradition I was familiar with and also make an impactful statement about Chicago publishing.
Yes.
And I have to say, no, I was not inspired by the Lakeside Press. I approached this project really more from the viewpoint of an artist making an artist book, and I wanted it to be more sculptural. So yeah, my answer is no.
Okay. All right. So the next question is for everyone who wants to answer. So did you do additional research for your piece beyond reading Chicago by the book?
I actually read the whole Tenements of Chicago. I mean, I skipped some of the data charts because it's so much data, but read pretty much the whole book because the writing is so to the point and kind of fascinating. And they're very inclusionary, I guess, because at one point, even one of the sisters went to Europe to try to figure out why certain groups were migrating or emigrating to the US, which kind of resonates with what's happening today. And so everything that's written in it was so shockingly similar to what's happening as we deal with immigration today. So I found myself really absorbed in it. And then I read some books about the sisters themselves. So I actually did a lot more reading for it than I really intended. So it was fascinating. It was kind of going down a rabbit hole that I didn't expect.
I can say that I've collected books on bookbinding and related crafts over my career. And for this particular book, I don't think that I did any special reading about it, but I was able to draw on, I guess, 40 or 50 years worth of reading in related fields. And I think all of us do that. We work from our experiences, what we've absorbed, and the impact that has carried over from something we might have seen before is triggered by looking at a book like this. And I must say that the challenge for me when I first received the book from Jackie was its shape. It was a little awkward to my eye, but it worked very well for the layout, the way that the book was designed. But in terms of traditional craft, which is what I'm more comfortable with, I found that that was the biggest challenge. And that's why I talked about trying to create something that would bring the eye closer to a rectangular shape than the squarish shape that the book has.
Yes, that was interesting when you talked about the lozenge and how it kind of changes the shape of the book to your eye. So thanks.
Well, to my eye anyway.
I did research on the Sears catalog. So I went online and there's someone that's digitized lots of old catalogs. So looking through the layouts and the advertisements and pulling language from the catalogs. That was my initial research. So I wanted to weave that into the book as well. And then I did research on the data because I knew I wanted to do charts. For a long time, I wanted to depict charts and graphs in letterpress. And so I looked for the right data that was simple enough to translate, so it'd be a quick read, and the data that was impactful to show the inequalities without someone taking like a really deep dive. So that's been a fair amount of time doing research on the publication itself and then the information that was going inside.
And I read a fair amount of Division Street, and it's really interesting because it's really Chicago. I'm a transplant. I'm from Boston, so it's interesting for me to read about Chicago from a particular place and time. Well, particular time, 65, and how much it's changed. And as I went out and took portraits during the pandemic, I started to realize that my book was also a record of a particular time. And as I progressed in taking the photos, it changed because it had to do with the people that I found and the people that were willing and the situations they were in. They were mainly forward-facing people who are out there, who have to go to their job, who deal with the public. And I really felt like it morphed. I would go in with my spiel and say, I'm making an artist book about Chicago, and it's based on this book, and will you let me take your portrait? And then it started being, you know, it's about the people who are showing up to work at this point in time, and what the city looks like right now. And I really feel like later on you're gonna, or I will at least look back and be struck by how things have changed.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think for me, the research was, first of all, I did get to read a lot of sci-fi pulp and creepy werewolf stories and stuff, which was very fun. But I think most of the unexpected research was all of the peripheral stuff around keeping my characters grounded in the 1930s. Both of the stories referenced in my book were published by 1932, I believe. And so I wanted to keep my characters vaguely within that time period. But, you know, obviously I was born a little bit after that. So I wanted to paint, you know, dotted lines down the street. But then I learned that they didn't really do that in the 30s. It was mostly a straight solid line. So I was redesigning that. I was mostly trying to keep myself free of anachronism with my research. I don't know how good I did, so sorry, but I think I did all right.
Yes, Lisa, did you want to talk about?
I would say that I did not do any research specifically for the project, but like Sam mentioned, you kind of draw upon all of your experiences and reference things that you have read, have seen, and experienced here in the city.
Okay. Jackie, do you want to continue with the? I have two more questions. We're over time.
I think we want to find out from the audience. Does the audience have some questions? Do we have some questions in the chat here?
Yes, but I can't find the name of the person. Ben is not on the list. Send chat to.
Just tell us what you'd like to ask, Marcia.
Ben, I have a old, at least one Montgomery Ward catalog I'd love to give him if he'd be interested.
I would be interested. Thank you. I remember the catalog from when I was a kid, but I haven't. I know there's one at the library at Northwestern or some there. I live in Evanston, but I'd love to. Thank you so much.
Yes,
I'll connect the two of you. I'll connect some addresses to connect the two of you, Ben. I'll make that
yes,
happen.
and the only thing I always say, where every blessing comes a curse, it cannot be cut apart. But I'd be delighted to give it to you, and a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, thank you. You as well.
Do we have any other questions?
I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'm just want to encourage everybody. If you have more questions, please write them down in the chat, and Martha will take them on.
Someone wrote sandblast vinyl. What's that? Robert wrote that.
So yeah, Robert Carroll wrote that. So you have to answer that question.
Yeah, it's actually I learned it last year in a workshop. So sandblast vinyl is a material I think they use to mask things out that they're gonna sandblast, like etching into glass. It's kind of a vinyl product that has an adhesive backing that I can put on a base to make it type high. I like it because I can cut it with an X-Acto knife, I can cut it with scissors. So all those kind of graphic shapes I can make quickly, adhere them to a base, and then pull them up. It prints really well. It's a little quicker than a lino cut and has more of a clean look.
I have one more question for Sam, if he's still here.
I'm here.
I'm in Chicago and you're far, but I have a Disraeli book from, I think, 1800s. I don't know. And the binding isn't good at the bottom, and I'm worried about that. It needs just to be tightened. Is that something you would like to see? It's a beautiful book, leather bound.
I'd be happy to take a look, yes.
Thank you.
We have a question from David Robson.
Mhm.
David Robson is asking, Marty, did you consider identifying the portrait subjects by name or occupation?
I didn't. I took down all the names for the record in a notebook and where I found them, but I didn't want to identify them because I thought about using names, making like a letterpress end sheet using the names, but I felt like it identified ethnicity too much. I wanted, I liked the fact that they were all blue and you had to, you had to, well, not guess. It's not like you're going to look through and guess. I just wanted it to be questionable.
Yeah.
I think that's all I see right now. So Jackie, feel free to.
I want to I'll wrap this up for this evening. First of all, I want to say that thank you all again. You know, it's one of the Caxton's great pleasures to have connections with so many wonderful book artists and binders. We don't get to see enough of you, and you should come back and visit us more. Tonight's program concludes the programming for our 125th anniversary year celebration. It would not have been possible without all of you. Thank you very much, and we will see you soon, live or on Zoom. The Caxton Club wants to stay connected. Have a wonderful summer. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.